Hello there and welcome back to some more Forza Top Gear Laps. Today we're rounding off our national episodes with a look at the cars of Italy. We begin with the 2016 Pagani Huayra BC, 740 horsepower, 737 foot-pound torque, 2,685 pounds of weight. This is the most powerful car here today. It is also the most torquey car here today. The Pagani Huayra BC, of course, an updated version of the standard Pagani Huayra. It is a more track-focused version of that car. I don't particularly like the standard Huayra, however I do have to say the BC is a rather big improvement on the standard Huayra, both in how it looks and also in how it drives, because the Huayra BC is a superb car to drive. The standard Huayra is a very odd car to drive. It really likes to get its arse end out. It drives very weird for a supercar, probably my least favourite of all of the supercar hypercars to drive, but the BC, this one is a really exceptional car to drive. It is absolutely awesome to drive. It has so much grip. The brakes are on point. The straight line speed is surprisingly good. Everything about this car is really very excellent. Yeah, it is just an absolutely superb all-round hypercar, and I do recommend you giving this one a tryout if you haven't already. Next up, the 2012 Lamborghini Aventador LP700-4, 700 horsepower, 509 foot-pound torque, 4,085 pounds of weight. It is the heaviest car here today. Interestingly enough, it is actually heavier than it was in previous Forzas because they've decided to weigh this thing with fluids now. Before they sort of weighed it dry, I assume, because it weighed about 3,600 pounds. Now it's all the way up to 4,085 pounds. So there's an interesting fact about the Aventador. I do really like the Lamborghini Aventador, probably my second favourite of the V12 supercars Lamborghini has produced. I will always prefer the Murcielago, especially the LP640, but the Aventador is a very close second in my book. As far as it goes to drive, this is a very lovely car to drive. The Aventador, and indeed most Lamborghinis in the Forza franchise, have always been very good. They have that all-wheel drive traction, which is very nice. They're very quick in a straight line. They don't really give you too many issues. Of course, going through the corners, you can feel a slight weight issue with this car. It's not quite as noticeable as you might think, considering it has magically grown 400 pounds since previous franchise entries. But yeah, the Aventador still has a little bit of issues getting through some of the corners. It is just that little bit heavier, and you can sort of tell it, unfortunately. Next up, 2004 Maserati MC12, 624 horsepower, 480 foot-pound torque, 3,142 pounds of weight. Of course, this car is related to the Ferrari Enzo, which we have had around the course previously. I believe that was one of the very first cars to go around the Top Gear track. The MC12, though, between this and the Enzo, I have always preferred the MC12. I think it looks better, in my personal opinion, and just something about it. I've never really liked the Enzo particularly, but the MC12 is a rather fantastic car. One of the reasons I liked it is because in Forza Motorsport 5, I discovered this thing is an absolute handling monster. In this game, it is still very great, do not get me wrong. It is a really very good car to drive. I've driven this thing for a few championships myself, and it's absolutely phenomenal. But it does seem to have a little bit more understeer than it did in previous entries now. That might not bother you so much. It certainly doesn't bother me so much, but if you're a person who really doesn't like understeery vehicles, well, as before, I probably would have recommended this car. Now, I would probably say maybe go towards the Enzo, because I don't think that has any real handling differences from its previous iterations yet. MC12 just a little bit more understeery. I still prefer it to the Enzo, but it is worth bearing in mind. Next up, 2012 Ferrari F12berlinetta, 730 horsepower, 508 foot-pound torque, 3,593 pounds. Well, it's the second most powerful car here today. It is only 10 horsepower off of that Pagani Huayra. Of course, this was the car that replaced the Ferrari 599, and this car has since been replaced by the Ferrari 812 Superfast, which maybe we'll get that in Forza one day. I'm sure that will be incredible and very silly. The F12berlinetta, though, I do rather like the F12berlinetta. I never really liked the 599 GTO, but yeah, the F12 really was a pretty cool car. Probably not my favourite of the Ferrari's Grand Tourers. I'd say that's the 612 Scaglietti and the 575, but this is definitely up there. As far as it goes to drive, it is a very good car to drive. You know, you read 730 horsepower, the fact this thing's a rear-wheel drive, you might sort of think, ooh, well, it'll be a bit awkward. It is very good to drive, however, I don't know if it's just the fact that I came from this just driving, you know, the MC12 and the Aventador and so on. it felt very odd in the way it handled. I can't really describe it, but it just never really felt right to me. It is still a good car to drive, and I do recommend you try it yourself, just to give yourself a run out in it. But for me personally, yeah, it's just a little bit weird. Next up, 2007 Alfa Romeo 8C Competizione. 450 horsepower, 354 foot-pound torque, 3,495 pounds of weight, similar to how the Enzo is related to the MC12 we've had previously. This car is actually related to the Maserati Gran Turismo. Admittedly though, this one has much higher PI, mainly because it weighs nowhere near as much as the Maserati. I think the Maserati was about 4,000 pounds. This thing weighs just under 3,500 pounds. Still not a light car, but it is much lighter. The Alfa Romeo 8C, probably one of the best looking cars we've got here today as well. I really like the way the 8C looks. It has grown on me significantly to when I first saw it. I now think this car is genuinely drop-dead gorgeous. As far as it goes to drive, this is a great neutral car to drive. It doesn't really have too much bias towards oversteer and understeer. That's sort of what I mean when it comes to neutral. It just feels really solid. It doesn't have particularly favourable handling characteristic on either end. I will say the one thing I did find with the 8C though, the brakes on this thing are very strange. They're not like, they're not what you'd expect. They feel very old, almost. It doesn't get stopped quite as well as it gets going. Let's put it that way. But despite that, the 8C, still a good car. I would take one of these a million times over the Maserati Gran Turismo. Next up, a complete change of pace now. 1986 Lancia Delta S4 road car, 247 horsepower, 214 foot-pound torque, 2,646 pounds of weight. Of course, we have this Delta in the game, but we also have a different Delta. We have the Delta S4 Group B rally version, which I'm sure will be a lot of fun when that goes around. That has a lot more power and a lot less weight and so on and so forth. But today, we've just got the standard road-going version, which admittedly is still a pretty mental car. Despite having its sort of boost dialed all the way down, it is still a pretty crazy thing. You can sort of see it going through corners. Yeah, this thing was a very, very interesting car. It was fun. I will say that much for it. It is a very, very fun car to drive, the Delta S4, because it just sort of bucks and leans. It gets its arse end out a little bit. Of course, it is mid-engined rear drive. Yeah, it is a very, very fun car to drive. It does have one rather scary handling characteristic though. Basically, if you go around a corner fast enough, the front tyres will start lifting off the ground. Now, it's fun when it does it, but it is pretty terrifying. It's not quite as terrifying as it used to be back in Forza 5. That was terrible. It would lift the front wheels up and basically then go rolling. I remember rolling this car quite a lot when I drove it last time. Didn't roll it this time, but yeah, it does still lift the front wheels up. That is something to bear in mind. Next up, 1957 Ferrari 250 California, 262 horsepower, 188 foot-pound torque, 2,315 pounds of weight. You saw the F12berlinetta early. That's Ferrari's more modern Grand Tourer. Now let's take a look at one of the older Grand Tourers from Ferrari, the fantastic 250 California. As far as best looking car here today goes, it really is between the 8C and the 250 Cali. I think from the front, the California looks fantastic. The rear end, not quite as much of a fan of it. Not really much of a fan of convertibles usually, but the 250 California is an absolutely phenomenal looking car. Yeah, I really do like the 250 California, and these things have proven to be fairly quick if you build them up. If you stick newer suspension on them, newer brakes, and so on and so forth, they can be fairly quick. One thing I will say for this car is the engine's really very reactive. It's almost like a modern engine, which is quite amazing. However, as far as it goes to drive, it is still very, very great. Out of the Grand Tourers that we've had over the last few weeks, which was the E-Type, and there was something else I'm forgetting, it was German, the 300 SL. This is the best driving between the 300 SL and the E-Type. However, this car has the most horrific brakes in the world. The brakes are awful. Awful on this thing. My braking zones in this, just to give you a comparison, my braking zones in this are the same braking zones I was using in the F12berlinetta. That is how awful the brakes are in that car. They are horrific. And finally today, the 1952 Fiat 8V Supersonic. 115 horsepower, 107 foot-pound torque, 2,050 pounds of weight. It is the least powerful, least torquey and lightest car here today. While the supersonic boom might hit you in just a few seconds, this car will take a few minutes to do that. Yeah, the 8V, of course, it was a very, very... it was a race car, I believe. And I'm sure it was very quick and very lovely back in its day. However, this is modern days and it isn't quick. There is no getting around the fact that this thing is rather slow. It's a very old car, it's a very lumbering car to drive. That being said, it is quirky, I will give it that. It definitely has all the makings of a good Italian car. It is quirky, and in some lines you could say it's beautiful. If you actually look this car up in real life, which I do recommend you do, it is actually a very, very pretty car. But yeah, it does look rather weird in Forza, I will admit it. It's, yeah, it's an interesting car. As I said, it's very old, it's very lumbering. It's okay to drive. I've driven worse things, certainly. I've driven worse cars from this time period. I've driven worse modern cars, if I'm being completely honest. But it's not great. There's no way this can be a great car. Well, I suppose if you upgrade it. Now, again, I think like the 250 California, this is another car that does benefit a fair bit from upgrades. But yeah, as it stays from standard, is it lifting the back wheel? I've just noticed that it might actually be lifting the back wheel through that corner. Yeah, as it stands stock, yeah, it's not particularly exciting. On to the leaderboard then, and we do have a slight surprise. In 4th place, the Pagani Huayra BC, 109.512. That's only 0.2 of a second off of the Radical SR8RX, which is a phenomenally quick car. And considering the Radical is a higher PI, yeah, that is incredible. It also beats a Nissan R390 by about 3 seconds as well, so the Huayra BC, very, very quick car indeed. We find the main cars of today in this sort of little bit of the leaderboard here. In 11th place, we find the Maserati MC12, 114.544. It is 0.3 seconds slower than an Enzo, but it is quicker than an SRT ACR Viper, McLaren 650S. The Lamborghini Aventador is in 14th place with 115.066, fractionally quicker than a McLaren 12C. It is about 0.4 seconds up on an Audi R8. Again, slightly slower than a McLaren 650S, wedges itself in between the two McLarens, which is pretty good when you consider the weight difference. In 18th place, we find the Ferrari F12berlinetta with a 115.958. Interestingly enough, 0.2 of a second quicker than a Ferrari 458 Italia, but it is slower than a modern-day Acura NSX. So, yeah, fairly decent times from all of the cars involved in that one. Moving down the board, in 45th place, we find the Alfa Romeo 8C Competizione with 120.537. It is quicker than a BMW M6. It is slightly slower than an Audi RS6. Interestingly enough, it is about 3 seconds up on a Maserati Gran Turismo, which again are fairly related cars. Moving down once again, 64th place goes to the Lancia Delta S4 road car, 124.795. It is slightly slower than a BMW 1 Series M Coupe. Interestingly enough, quicker than the Evo 6 and the Evo 10 and the Hawkeye Impreza. So yeah, the old rally car apparently can beat the slightly newer rally cars. In 89th place, we find the Ferrari 250 California with 128.716, wedging it in between a Dodge Neon SRT4 and a Chevrolet Bel Air Hoonigan. I don't know what it is about these old GT cars ending up in places that they should never end up in, but there you go, that's where the 250 California has ended up. And finally today, well, it isn't a surprise. In 117th place, the Fiat 8V Supersonic with 142.251, making it 0.2 of a second slower than a C1 Corvette. It is only quicker than the Land Cruiser and the Volkswagen Beetle. Not a huge surprise there. Anyways, friends, I want to thank you all very much for watching this edition of Forza Top Gear Laps. As I mentioned at the top of the episode, this is the final of the national-based episode, so I do hope you've enjoyed this one. Next time, we are going to be taking a look at Creator's Choice, which is the cars that, well, interest me personally, so I hope you'll join me for that. Until then, thanks for watching, and farewell.